Welcome to this special news interview. I'm Mayank Chaya. The controversial former National Security Advisor John Bolton says he is worried about the incoming Biden administration's approach to China generally and how they deal with Beijing's threats to Taiwan, its efforts to make South China see its own province, its repression of Uyghurs, and what he calls two belligerent incidents along the line of actual control with India provoked by China. He also says the assassination of Iran's top nuclear scientist, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, will make Tehran only more paranoid and more troublesome throughout the region. Ambassador Bolton, who served as President Trump's national security advisor for 17 months until his acrimonious firing in September 2019, told Bharat FM in an interview that an operation like the one that ended Fakhrizadeh's life can sometimes be in planning for months, if not years. Here is Ambassador John Bolton.
Given the shortness of time, to get straight off the bat with a rather important development in Iran, the
Right.
assassination of the scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. How do you read it? Do you think it's part of a broader strategy to sort of muck up things for the incoming administration?
Well, without commenting on specifically this operation, I think it's important that everyone understand these things can't be done overnight. You can't get an idea and then bring it into operation in a few days or even weeks. You can have in mind a clandestine operation that requires the everything to come together in the at the right place at the right time. So this can be planned for months, years, uh, but for whatever reason, it may not go off until everything aligns, all the stars align. Uh, I don't think there's much doubt that Fakhrizadeh's death is going to have a big impact on the Iranian nuclear program. He's been uh, really the father of the nuclear weapons work that they've been doing, and uh, he certainly has the entire history going back to the Ahmad project, obviously right down to the present day. He knows uh, what all pieces of the Iranian nuclear operation are doing. You know, it's a very what we say in the United States, very highly compartmentalized program. Very few people have the big picture, and I doubt anyone has the history. So his demise is certainly going to set things back, and I think it shows a couple of things as well. Number one, whoever did this, and obviously the speculation is that it's Israel, perhaps working with other partners. But when you combine it with the attacks on the Natanz nuclear facilities, attacks earlier this year on Iran's some of Iran's ballistic missile facilities, you can see that whoever is doing this can strike almost at will throughout Iran, and that has to fill the Ayatollahs with fear that if they can't protect people like Fakhrizadeh, they couldn't protect Qasem Soleimani, obviously from the U.S. attack. They are very, very vulnerable. Now, that you would think in a rational context that would make them more amenable to negotiation. I don't anticipate that's what will happen. I don't think this will help the Biden administration in that sense at all. I think it will make the regime more paranoid and more troublesome throughout the region.
So, in a sense, it forecloses any more serious diplomatic option for the Biden administration.
Yes, I think that's right. Although again, I'd say that that's a consequence of the incident, not necessarily the principal motivating factor. But I think Biden would soon come to the realization that this is not 2015 anymore. That circumstances in the broader Middle East have changed dramatically. They've changed dramatically inside Iran as well. And the idea that you could just press a button and go back to the 2015 deal, I think, was never realistic. They would have figured that out sooner rather than later. I think they are now driven to try and revise their policy more quickly. I think they're driven by a couple of other things. I think Trump's what I consider very ill-advised decision to draw down American forces both in Iraq and in Afghanistan, I think also forces the Biden team to come to decisions on what they think the appropriate U.S. and allied missions in Iraq and Afghanistan are, and therefore what the appropriate force posture is. I don't think they wanted to do that right at the beginning. I think, honestly, they don't want to pay much attention to foreign affairs if they can get away with it. They're focused on the coronavirus pandemic, understandably. But, the rest of the world doesn't wait on our schedule, and this is a good example of it.
India and China have been locked in some of the most intense warlike tensions in nearly 6 decades. How do you see the incoming Biden administration approaching that problem?
Well, I'm worried about the Biden administration's approach on China generally. I'm worried about how they deal with threats to Taiwan, how they deal with China's effort, in effect, to make the South China Sea a province of China's, how they deal with internal developments like the repression of the Uyghurs and the violation of the joint Sino-UK declaration on the handover of Hong Kong, really obliterating the one country, two systems idea. And obviously, Beijing has difficult relations in Southeast Asia with countries like Vietnam, long historical differences. And as you rightly say, we've just seen now along the line of actual control two belligerent incidents provoked by Chinese forces. And just this weekend, reported in the U.S. Media that they've built a village inside territory claimed by Bhutan, much in the same way that they've been trying to create facts on the ground in the South China Sea, taking rocks and reefs that are above water by a few inches on a good day and making them into air and naval bases. So none of this is by accident. I give the Chinese leadership great credit. They think in long-term strategic terms. They think through the implications of their actions, and I think we are all in for a long period of testing. All of the countries on China's periphery, and obviously the U.S. is a principal actor in the Indo-Pacific. I don't think the Trump administration had an effective strategy for dealing with China. I know in the past year, obviously, it's had a very hardline approach, but that's because it suited Trump politically, given what we know about China's cover-up of the coronavirus outbreak in China. And it shifted because it was politically convenient for Trump away from a 3 years of dealing with China, focused mainly on trying to get a big economic deal. I think if Trump had won after the inauguration in January, he could have turned on a dime and gone right back to that earlier approach. But that's not to say that the incoming Biden administration is a great treat here. I think their default position would be something like how Obama viewed China, which would be very, very disturbing. They took an entirely benign view. We can see from personnel decisions that have already been announced or coming in next days in the national security space, in the economic space, filled with people from the Obama administration. So that return to the default position, I think, is almost baked in. Now, I do think Biden understands that American public opinion on China has changed dramatically because of the coronavirus, because of a number of other things we've talked about. So the best I could offer, my best guess, is that Biden's China policy is still a work in progress. And if that's true, then I think all of us who are concerned about taking too relaxed a view of China's activities still have an opportunity to make the case that we need a harder line.
A final question about this particular aspect. You have, I'm sure, been aware of the rise of the quadrilateral arrangement between the US, Japan, India, and Australia. In fact, Australia just had a intense altercation only a day ago. How do you look at the rise of Quad in the context of China's discomfort?
Well, I think it's an important strategic framework. Certainly, the United States has felt for many years, looking at East Asia and the Pacific, that we have not had the benefit of a complex web of alliance structures like we do in Europe through NATO. U.S. has a lot of very important bilateral alliances, but sometimes, as we can see in the case of South Korea and Japan, our bilateral partners often have difficulties that make a more effective cooperation difficult. So this idea of the quadrilateral structure, I think, is very important and deserves a lot of attention in the future. This is sadly another opportunity missed largely during the Trump administration, where both Prime Minister Modi of India and Prime Minister Abe of Japan pushed very hard for every opportunity for the Quad to get together, and so did the Australians. And yet, when we did, all we ever talked about was bilateral trade disputes, which U.S. has a lot with India, has a lot with everybody. That's the nature of bilateral trade, rather than focusing on the strategic common interests that we all shared. So I suspect, although it pains me to say it, that actually Biden will pay more attention to developing this framework. But obviously, to be successful, it has to be based on a realistic assessment of the risks and dangers that China's policies pose for us.
You've already referred briefly to the withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan and Iraq. I want your view on how you think it might impact as President Trump demeets office, how it might impact the regional balance between India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and China.
Right. Well, just to take Iraq first, I don't think we have finished our work dealing with the ISIS threat, despite the destruction of the ISIS territorial caliphate in western Iraq and eastern Syria, which I think was a major accomplishment. ISIS hasn't gone away, and stability against the threat that Iran poses to try and use the Shia majority in Iraq, the Assad regime in Syria, and the terrorist Hezbollah group in Lebanon to form a kind of barrier across the northern Middle East remains a serious strategic problem for the U.S., for Israel, for our Arab allies in the region. So that's something that is, I think, a real problem, has less of an effect moving eastward, but it undermines confidence in America's staying power around the world, really, especially given the difficulties posed by Turkey and Russia operating in their own interest in the region. Now, in Afghanistan, I have to say, I think the troop level is only a small part of the larger problem that we face now for over a year, which is the administration's poorly advised effort to negotiate with the Taliban. I think, look, everybody wants Afghanistan to be peaceful, and so not under the control of terrorists who would risk once again making Afghanistan a home for other terrorist groups that would threaten their neighbors or terrorist acts around the world, as we saw on 9/11 and in subsequent attacks around the region. I think it was a mistake to negotiate directly with the Taliban, at least for as long as we did, without bringing the Afghan government in. I wouldn't trust the Taliban as far as I could throw them. I think there were any number of indications this wasn't going to work. I think it's the deal that was agreed to with the Trump administration is coming apart right in front of us. And I'm gravely worried if the troop drawdown continues and if Biden simply acquiesces in it, that this immeasurably strengthens Taliban's hand in Afghanistan with implications right across the board. Look, I think there needs to be a U.S. and allied military presence in Afghanistan much larger than the Trump administration contemplated, even under the terms of the deal, even if Taliban had been complying with it, and now they propose to bring it down to a level of 2,500 Americans, which makes no military sense at all. It's a completely arbitrary number. I think there need to be American military forces there, not just to deal with the threat of terrorism inside Afghanistan, but but to be there to have capabilities to watch what's going on inside Iran and in Pakistan, two nuclear powers or aspiring nuclear powers that pose grave threats to the region, to the United States, to the whole world, and we're severely undermining that capability if we come down as low as Trump has proposed. So I'm worried that instability could grow. I mean, I'm obviously worried about terrorist groups using Afghanistan as a base, but I'm worried about Pakistan as well. I'm worried at the terrorist level. I'm worried at the level of nuclear capabilities falling into terrorist hands, and I'm really worried at the macro level that Pakistan remains vulnerable to a terrorist takeover of the government. I mean, there are already significant terrorist elements in parts of the Pakistani military, and if you envision the absolute worst case where Pakistani Taliban or others really took control of the government, to see those nuclear capabilities spread by design into terrorist hands, and obviously the overall risk of a nuclear confrontation with India. So these are dangerous times, and an unstable Afghanistan contributes to that in measurable ways. So I think in the Trump administration, we at the end there, the wrong course was being pursued. I don't know what Biden's view is. I don't know that he understands this enough. I don't know that he's fit this picture together with how you deal with China. I mean, I can certainly see from India's perspective, it looks like it's one large conflict. If you look at China's efforts for decades to influence Pakistan, this is very troubling. And I think from the U.S. perspective in the Indo-Pacific region, you can't separate and just say, well, we've got the Afghanistan problem over here and we've got the China problem over there, when to players in the region, they're very much related.
To come to local U.S. domestic challenges, the U.S. is long accustomed to sermonizing to young democracies around the world about the need for free and fair elections and smooth transition of power. In light of what we have witnessed in the manifestly egregious conduct of President Trump and his team, do you think America has lost its high moral ground on that issue?
Well, I don't. I've never been one for sermonizing to others. Anyway, U.S. has been sermonized to by a lot of people for a long time. None of us like that either. So we could all dispense with sermonizing internationally with no great loss. I think actually, on balance, the U.S. response to what Trump has done, both before and after November 3rd, should really give us all good heart. I mean, I think his comments, including his most recent comments on Sunday, that implicate the FBI and the Justice Department in the stealing of the election or being complicit in not investigating alleged wrongdoing during the election, really is. Just as you think Trump can't go any further, he does. But despite what he's been saying, despite this campaign of legal and political pressure, the system is held. I discussed this in an article actually that's appearing this morning in the Dispatch, a new conservative website, the dispatch.com, on the future of conservatism in the U.S. And I think the state legislators and the Republican member of the state board of canvassers who withstood Trump's pressure, who allowed Michigan's election results to be certified, are real heroes. I think the Georgia Secretary of State, Raffensperger, the Georgia Governor, Kemp, are heroes as well. I think our judiciary has done a fantastic job. Trump's record is something like two wins, 36 losses so far. I may be a little bit behind. I think we're withstanding his efforts to try and take the election with no evidence whatever. We're doing okay. We could do better. We could have more senior Republican leaders around the country speak out. They're worried about the effect on Trump's supporters. I worry about not speaking out and the effect that has on Trump's supporters. We know what the truth is. We shouldn't be afraid to say it, and I think we'll benefit from the political consequences. Speaking as a Republican, as a conservative here, we won't be harmed by the consequences of facing the truth. But by and large, despite a lot of hysteria displayed around on both sides of the spectrum and by some in the media, the correct election result is going to prevail here. So I think we've had a stress test, and I think we passed it.
You have described President Trump as a sort of an equivalent of a street rioter, throwing stones through windows. I'm curious, that temperament of his has been known for decades, and yet hundreds of top people, including you, chose to work for and with him closely, not to mention 74 million people who voted for him. So the question that one may ask is, who's right, the 74 million people or the people who seem to know a lot in Washington?
Well, I'll just address my circumstances first. I felt when I went to work for the administration in April of 2018 that, I mean, I had met with Trump, I'd spoken with him, I heard all the criticisms. Few people have ever called me naive, so I think I knew what I was getting into, at least in part. But I also felt that Trump would be affected by the importance of the presidency, the weight of the responsibility that an American president has, as every one of his predecessors was affected by it. And that turned out to be wrong. I don't think to this day he fully understands what it means to be president of the United States. I know that sounds remarkable, but I think he still thinks he's running something equivalent in size to the Trump organization. And he will be running that again very soon. But he never adjusted and embodied the role that a president is supposed to have. He did have some political success, obviously, but I think that a lot of the people who voted for him are solid Republicans who would vote for the Republican nominee no matter who it might turn out to be. There are other people he brought into the party. 40 years ago, Reagan brought many blue-collar families into the Republican Party. They were called Reagan Democrats because they felt abandoned by the Democratic Party. I think Trump brought in many millions of those kinds of people, and I say that's great. Let's keep them, but let's also get back the many millions of people that Trump pushed away. If you look at the Republican Party's performance on a nationwide basis below Trump, we defied all the predictions. It looks like we can yet retain control of the Senate. Depends on Georgia, of course. We picked up a significant number of seats in the House of Representatives. Still don't know exactly what the final number is, but we will be very close to a position where in 2022 we could take control of the House. We didn't lose control of a single state legislature. We picked up one governorship. So I think on balance, the party has a bright future if we can cut the Trump albatross off from around our neck successfully without alienating his supporters. And I just don't see why that's not possible on the assumption we can level with them, which is what, I mean, look, in America, plain speaking is still a virtue. And I think we need more of our leaders to engage in plain speaking, and then we're off to the races.
Among the many names that he has called you, the latest is described in a tweet, a real dope, quoting him there. And he calls you one of the dumbest people in the government, a sullen, dull, and quiet guy. He added nothing national security except, gee, let's go to war. Also, illegally released much classified information. How do you respond to something like that?
Well, look, it's juvenile for the president to say things like that, but I take some solace from the fact I'm not the only one he's gone after that way. Really, it's unpresidential. I try not to respond to it. Uh, a lot of people went to work in his administration to try and help the country out. Many of them I disagreed with. I write about some of the disagreements in my book, but I think they were patriotic. I think they wanted to do the right thing. And I think we all ran into the obstacle that Donald Trump thought only about one thing and still thinks only about one thing, and that's the greater glory of Donald Trump. And that doesn't make for a successful president.
Speaking of that, the Republican Party's approach towards him has been to ride his immense popularity as much as it could along its ideological agenda and then forget about the larger harm it might do to the country. Do you think that's a fair view?
Well, I hope not. I do think this is a character test for the Republican Party. I've said that. I think that Trump did many things that Republicans agree with. Just to take something out of the national security area, they agree overwhelmingly with his record of judicial appointments, especially 3 justices on the Supreme Court. But in a way, it's been a devil's bargain because of the damage that he's done. Now I think in the post-November 3 period, more and more people appreciate what he's doing is damaging the country, certainly damaging the Republican Party. And I think that the more we talk about it, the more we explain that this is not Trump acting out of character. This is Donald Trump as he has been for 4 years, and many people just haven't seen it. I think the damage that Trump has done can be corrected internationally, domestically. I think it can actually be corrected fairly quickly. I didn't support him for the first time in my adult life, not voting for the Republican nominee for president, because I did worry that if he had 2 terms, some of that damage might well become irreparable. But I think we can recover the lost ground. I just think it's important that we not allow this myth that somehow the election was stolen to become frozen in people's minds. And I think that's the risk we run if Trump is still out there talking about the election being stolen, and not enough Republicans are saying it wasn't stolen. You have no evidence. You have no legal theories. I understand the Democrats and the liberals in the media are going to say that, but that's not going to persuade Republicans and independents who supported Trump. We need Republicans themselves, more of them, to come forward and say what's increasingly obvious to everybody.
Last 2 questions. One is in your massive bestseller, The Room Where It Happened. You clearly indicate your ambition to have been named Secretary of State. That did not come to be. What's your assessment of the way Mike Pompeo has conducted in that role, especially his refusal to concede election and even say that second term Trump term is coming up?
Yeah, well, in our early days in our respective offices, Mike and I worked together on a number of very significant issues, trying to overthrow the Maduro regime in Venezuela and so on. And I think what disappointed me ultimately was that in cases like dealing with North Korea, with the Taliban in Afghanistan, he at some point just acquiesced to what Trump wanted to do. Now, neither one of us misunderstood that the president makes the final decisions, but when he's going in the wrong direction, the job of the advisor is to give the best advice he or she can, up to the point where either the president or the advisor decide it's time to call it quits. And I think Mike failed in that. And I think I attribute it to his presidential ambitions. I think he wanted to be Donald Trump's heir. He's made his choice. Now he's going to have to live with it.
And finally, with some levity, I hope you don't mind this question because you do refer to it in the book about your mustache during one of your meetings with the president as you're awaiting your turn. You do write, you bring your mustache to the meeting. What's with your mustache?
Well, I've had it since I got out of active duty for training in the Army. And, I'm a conservative, as Lord Chesterfield once said, when it is not necessary to change, it is necessary not to change. So there you have it.
On that note, Ambassador Bolton, I'm grateful for your time, and I'll send you all the finished video through.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Enjoyed being with you.